King Charles is benefiting hugely from illegal migration, refugees and asylum seekers into this country. Once again, this man has a conflict of interest and he doesn't seem to care about it. Hello everyone, this is Andre Walker. Thanks so much for watching this video. As you know by now, dragging out a protester from the Trump dinner was considered unacceptable in some quarters, and now I have a legal battle to avoid getting into serious trouble over it. Please do donate to the Patriot Fund. It will enormously help me out with the legal fees. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Charles Mountbatten, as I like to call him. He is somebody who I think represents the way the establishment has completely lost touch with Britain and the way that we can no longer rely on our political leaders to do the right thing for us and indeed for the country. So he has benefited already, and I've told you about soldiers dying. Those soldiers that die in the county of Lancashire without a will or any family, he will automatically inherit their money. Also, of course, he will get that from anybody. And I'll tell you why I think that that is extremely important, because with a falling birth rate in Britain, there are more and more people who have large assets in Lancashire dying without either a will or family. And of course, King Charles inherits all of their money. So it's not just soldiers he inherits it from, he also inherits it from everybody else. Now, that is a long-standing arrangement. The reason I complained about soldiers before is because I always thought it was wrong for a commander-in-chief to benefit. But bluntly, because I now know the damage that uncontrolled immigration is doing to Lancashire, actually, once again, he financially benefits. But how else is he going to benefit? Well, King Charles is one of the biggest property owners in the country, and we've all seen house prices run out of control. He was meeting with Keir Starmer this week, and on the agenda was the issue of new towns and new villages. Now, Poundbury, that he built in the middle of a green belt, which nobody else would have been allowed to do, by the way, is clearly a very nice place. It's built to traditional British building standards. He had this concept that rather than attempt to build a place that's just a big box that's ugly and argue about its mass, what he did instead was he spoke to local people saying, what facilities do you want in the village? Well, if you want a fire station, then you're going to need to have an extra 100 houses or whatever. So I get that. But as more new towns need to be built for new migrants to live in, because remember, the houses, particularly social housing, will go as a priority to those migrants, the King benefits in a couple of ways. The Prince's Foundation for Architecture, now the King's Foundation for Architecture, will start to do a lot of the planning for that. Also, a lot of the land that these new towns may be built on will be owned by the royal estate, and he can do two things. He can either sell the land completely, which is unlikely, or what he's more likely to do is lease the land back. Now, I know some of you are going to talk about the fact that there's Crown Estate and there's his personal property and the civil list and all this sort of thing. But fundamentally, the sovereign grant is based on a percentage of the amount of money that the Crown Estates earn, and the more property that's built on the Crown Estates, the more the King benefits. But that's not the only way that His Majesty the King benefits. Look at the way that wages have gone down since uncontrolled immigration has come in. I bet you there is not one single person watching this programme who feels richer today than they did 20 years ago. I simply don't believe it. Yes, okay, things like TVs, computers and cars have gone down in price, but food, which is food and accommodation, which are your two biggest expenses, and fuel being your third, they've gone up so much that it's massively mitigated that. But it's not been bad for everybody, because this glut of cheap labour has pushed down wages. Now, that means that King Charles benefits in all sorts of roundabout ways, whether that be supplies for his household going down, whether that be the price of produce that he buys on a large scale going down, because it's not just food, obviously, he buys, it's also cheap imported Chinese goods for his gift shops and things like that. This man is hugely financially benefiting. And I'm going to tell you a little story. A few years ago, I appeared on Sky, and I remember talking to Sarah Jane Mee, who was having a go at me about my opposition to uncontrolled immigration. Now, just to remind you about my view on uncontrolled immigration, one of the things that I liked about the European Union was the free movement of people. I actually think it's quite a good idea, as long as the countries are similarly wealthy. So I wouldn't have allowed free movement when Poland first came in. I'd definitely allow it now, because it's just not a thing anymore as long as the countries are similarly wealthy. But at the time, I was arguing against uncontrolled immigration because I didn't want people from the European Union coming in undercutting British workers, because that was a problem at the time. And Sarah Jane Mee said, but how am I going to clean my toilet if nobody comes from Estonia? And I thought, well, hang on a second, you know, the reality is what we are doing in this country and what people like King Charles and what people like Tony Blair are advocating is very simply this. We need people in this country to do the jobs that we don't want to do. Well, hang on a second. Why don't people want to do these jobs? The reason people don't want to do the jobs is because the terms and conditions are terrible. Do you know that Amazon is running out of people to have? Because what they do is they'll bring in a cohort of 200 members of staff, and then they'll sack 150 for being too slow, and the other 50 will end up sort of misshapen like Monty Burns from The Simpsons, and then they'll fire them as well. They're running out of people, so they need uncontrolled immigration to come into the country. And so they are, you know, there's just this thing where you're pushing down standards, you're pushing down pay, you're pushing down employment rights. Look at the issue with haulage. When we said, well, when we leave the European Union, there'll be nobody to drive the trucks. Do you know what happened? Truckers got a £2,000 pay rise. Now, I'm not advocating for everybody to put up their wages massively, but I will say one thing. British workers do need to have a wage that they can live on. And of course, uncontrolled immigration prevents that. And what would happen if we did it the other way? Well, what would happen if we did it the other way is that, yes, things might be a little bit more expensive in the shops, though largely, you know, the fact that it takes a day longer and costs you £1 to get an Amazon delivery rather than it being done immediately and for free. Is that such a high price to pay for ensuring that British workers have rights and have a decent salary? I don't think it necessarily is. But that is the thing that's happening now. All of these bigwigs are attempting to push for more uncontrolled immigration because it's all in their financial interest. Tony Blair, I remember saying, and I admit I stole this from the West Wing, at the time of the Brexit referendum, Tony Blair going, yeah, the European Union's created 2 million jobs. And I kept saying to people, yeah, but I know people who've got 3 of them and they still can't pay the bills. That is the reality of the situation. I think it's time for the king to be separate in a way that everybody was up until Queen Victoria. Do you know that William IV, even George IV, the great spender of money, you know, he didn't have any of his own money. It was all given to him by Parliament, and he built the Brighton Pavilion, Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, etc. What's happening now is this massive conflict of interest where His Majesty the King is using his position to guarantee that his own personal wealth increases. If you were to do that in local government, they'd lock you up. They'd say it was an undeclared prejudicial interest. But of course, the king is exempt from that. Even in Parliament, you would get into significant trouble for not declaring an interest in all of these things. But when it comes to intestate, when it comes to property, when it comes to low-cost deliveries of products, King Charles benefits from all of them. And okay, he doesn't directly receive a cheque for uncontrolled immigration, but what difference does it make when the man is a billionaire? Anyway, I want to thank you for watching this video. Please do subscribe and please do donate to the Patriot Fund. We've got these legal bills to deal with. I'm really annoyed because I organised that dinner for Donald Trump's arrival in Windsor and it's going to end up costing me an absolute fortune that I don't have. Until next time, goodbye.